Welcome, everyone. We are delighted to kickstart 2025 with a virtual fireside chat centered around professional growth. My name is Anu Rao, and I oversee marketing globally for the Indotronics Avani Group. We connect clients with best fit talent across North America, Europe, and India. Talent Views is a virtual fireside chat series presented by us, with every episode featuring live conversation with top practitioners in procurement, managed services, staffing, DE&I, sustainability, and so much more. Today, we are delighted to welcome the engaging and charismatic speaker and procurement leader, Alan Shilson, to our virtual stage. Alan Chilson is currently serving as the Director of Talent Acquisition Vendor Management at Danaher Corporation. He has over 20 years of experience in talent acquisition leadership roles, where his responsibilities have included managing both internal and external teams involved in securing new talent for the organization. In his current role, Alan manages a global team that provides subject matter expertise and process optimization of RPO, MSP, and search firm vendors globally for Danaher Corporation. Danaher is a global science and technology innovator in the biotechnology, diagnostics, and life sciences industries. Alan has been recognized as a DE&I influencer and as a contingent workforce program manager, a game changer multiple times. He currently serves on the advisory boards for the ProcureCon Contingent Staffing Conference and TADA, and is also an active member of several contingent workforce industry professional networking groups. Welcome, Alan.
Thanks, Anu.
Before we dive in, a note to all our attendees. This is meant to be an interactive session. So please do drop your questions in the chat and we will get to it in the last 10 minutes. If we are not able to get to your question due to time constraints, we will ensure that those questions are addressed in a follow-up note from us. So Alan, today we have a record number of participants. No pressure. So let's start. Let's dive right in. Now, before I do that, I think I should close my email because I seem to be constantly beeping off getting emails.
Okay.
Okay.
Don't want any distractions, right?
No distractions. So I'm going to stop sharing and let's dive in. Our topic is centered around networking, continuous learning, and mentorship. We will begin with the networking aspect of today's topic. Now, this is a topic that you were the one who came up with because you thought it was important, and I do so agree with you. I'd love to hear from you. Why is networking so important from the procurement perspective? For procurement executives, why should they focus on it to build trusting relationships with suppliers?
Yep. So I'll start with one thought there, right? So I think this goes for anybody, right? So anybody working the contingent workspace, but even if you go beyond, what we all do. I remember, and I'm going to share kind of an old story to start with this, right? So as I was stressing to get back online, I was thinking, okay, what do I want to say? So I remember back, and this is over 20 years ago, there was a guy named Jerome Leday up in New Jersey. He was very active in the Society of Human Resource Management. And every year at the conference, he did a session called Networking is Not for Not Working, right? And it was geared towards people who were job seekers, right? And that's usually who attended. It was an early morning session, so it wasn't one of the highest attended, but I did sit through it because I knew Jerome, and the message was pretty clear, and to me it applies to people even who aren't job seeking, is the fact that you can't just grow your network when you're out of work. So I mean, I think if I translate that to the business development people that may be out here on the call, you can't just grow your network or your prospect list when you're trying to get to a sales goal for the month. You should be constantly out there engaging. And for those of us on the buyer side, the same sort of thing. You can't just dip out to suppliers or service providers or your peers and ask for help just when you need it and not be out there contributing to that community constantly. So I think it's really important to network. I think once you build relationships through networking with sincere attempts, it's sincere intents even, right? So, not networking for the next sale or to find your next job or get an answer to your question, right? But you're out there truly networking, making yourself available, building relationships. Then you get ready to be able to do knowledge sharing. Um, so, I just find when people are comfortable, that they can share openly without the risk of somebody saying, "Hey, I can sell you a solution," right? Or you should hire me to fix that. Um, that's where two or more people can truly have a productive conversation, right? And share knowledge and ideas. Um, you know, and and since we have the chat open, and hopefully everybody didn't leave when I had, tech issues, but so for everybody out there too, when we think about this topic, right, and building networks and really building relationships, how different do you think your next business development interaction, and that's regardless of whether you sit on which side of the fence, but how different would that next interaction go if the approach was geared towards true networking and knowledge sharing, right, and maybe a long-term relationship building? Versus that usual question from the business development person within the first few minutes winds up being, how can I partner with your company? Right. So the guard goes up and you don't have that productive interaction. You don't build networking. You remember that person as a salesperson, not a community member. So I just think it's a really big deal, right? To actively build your network, to make yourself available to help others. Um, but you can't only be a taker, right? If and that's whether you're a buyer who needs information or you're a business development person who is looking for business. But you have to be a giver too. You have to contribute to that community so that there's inventory to come back your way as well, is the way I look at it.
I am glad you, what here essentially, one of the things that came across to me was be authentic when you are talking to people. Bring your real
Absolutely.
self and don't immediately think of the immediate sales goal in it, right? I'm glad you bring that up because it's so important. There's so many times I have gotten a sale months or even years after it actually the gates opened up, or rather the
Hmm.
relationship started. So that brings me to the next question, which is, from your perspective, you see all kinds of salespeople, right? What would be the best practices for suppliers when they approach buyers in the networking scenario? Sometimes they are able to build relationships, but sometimes in an exhibit hall, they have only that 30 seconds. So,
Hmm.
how would you suggest that we put our best foot forward?
I mean, I think that's a hard one, right? Because it is that it's the elevator speech moment, right? You have 30 seconds, you have a minute, you're trying to grab me as I'm walking through the exhibit hall to get a cup of coffee before the next session at a conference. Um, I think it's really hard, right? Other than basically saying, hey, I see you're a speaker, or I've seen your YouTube videos. I really would like to meet you, right? Shake your hand, tell you I've enjoyed hearing your stuff and would love to connect and network with you at some time, right? And that connect and network versus I want to learn about your program, because that immediately takes it away from a networking, learning interaction to I want to do a sale, right? So, yeah, and Danny says make it personal, make it meaningful. So yeah, I mean, mention what is attracting you to want to talk to that person, and then ask, hey, could we connect for a cup of coffee later, or a call after the conference, right? Because I think that's the thing to keep in mind too is the buyers out there are there to learn, they're to network. The sponsors are there, and you've paid a lot of money to be there trying to meet people to build your prospect list, but um, it's rare that any of us is there looking to buy, right? And that's whether you're a staffing supplier, whether you're selling a VMS, whether you're an MSP. Um, and if I'm there at the conference looking for a new MSP, I'm going to probably have already scheduled some meetings with the MSP people I want to talk to, right? So for them to also look to tackle me and try to get a conversation right there to talk, business or technology is going to be hard, right? And so I think it's just being mindful of that and also being mindful of how many times, right, those buyers are getting pelted with that same, I'd like to talk to you for a couple of minutes at those events, right? So it's how do you also have to differentiate yourself, right? So tell me something about yourself, not necessarily your company, but um, why would I want to interact with you as well, right? For a networking call, for a knowledge exchange.
This was really useful. So I took away three very good points. One is differentiate yourself as a person. It doesn't always have to be differentiate yourself as a company. Number one. Number two was make those appointments beforehand. At that moment, you cannot expect the person to suddenly sit in with you when you're rushing from one meeting to another. And the third one was when you're meeting the person in a passageway, just say hello. I mean, you cannot suddenly expect that person to talk to you about their entire sales needs. I mean, whatever service needs are.
Right.
So, I hope people are taking notes because awesome. I love my favorite point, differentiate yourself
Hmm.
because you're trying to build that trustworthy relationship.
Right. Yep. And keep in mind, I mean, I think the other biggest thing when you're asking for that advanced meeting or future meeting is what are you going to bring to the table that should interest me? Right. So
Hmm.
especially for those of us that are out speaking and you've seen us talk, you kind of know about our programs already. Um,
Hmm.
you know, so obviously I've been out and spoken about DE&I a few times, right? I've spoken about some other things. Maybe you want to have a conversation about that, or you want to share, a success story you've had. That would also be a differentiator, right? Because everybody else is like, hey, I want to learn about your program. Can you put me in touch with your MSP? But why would I want to have that conversation? So tell me what you can bring, right? What's a case study from a client? What did you learn somewhere recently from another one of your clients? Because that way it does become it's a conversation, right? I'm not worried about sitting down and having a sales meeting, right? But we're going to
Hmm.
have a conversation, and it could turn into sales at some point, um but if you're going to try to get us to want to engage, there should really be a what are you bringing to the table, right? It's kind of like being invited to a potluck, right? Everybody has to bring something.
Hmm.
That's how you should approach these meeting requests too, right? Is what are you going to bring as opposed to what are you just looking to get from me?
Hmm. Thank you. Uh, Now, this kind of segues into the next part. I know that you oversee the talent acquisition globally. Uh, Given that we are living in a remote environment, a virtual environment, a global environment where different cultural aspects have to be considered, how would you how do you think a person can best network given a virtual global environment?
Yeah, so that becomes a big challenge, right? So I think we all, we all aspire, right? It sounds really exciting when you're going to have a global job until you step back and say, okay, how am I going to do this, right? It's a totally different venue I'm stepping into, right? So my role here at Danaher is a global one. Um, it was called a global one when I joined back in 2021, but it got real and real, right, with capital letters in quarter 3 of 2023, right? As I started globalizing our direct hire search firm contracts in support of our new global TA model, right? So we were taking away what used to be local contracts that were between a search firm and an operating company and centralizing them all under a Danaher MSA. And this didn't come easy, as you can't simply, carbon copy how we do it here in the US and apply that to the world. Yet that was the MSA I had to work with, right? Was the same one we've used here because that was what corporate procurement and legal and privacy said we had to work with. And I've had experiences in the past working across multiple countries. Um, when I was at BASF and as well as when I was at AstraZeneca, and so some of the things I learned between this most recent global activity at Danaher and those past roles, I mean, I think for one, is you do have to think about, kind of what I was saying about bringing something to the conversation and giving something to people as well. Because, you can't just go to people and say, hey, I need you to come over here and do this Danaher level contract because we're not going to work with you otherwise. That was the truth, right? I knew I had that power behind me is that our global VP of TA and our global head of HR had said, hey, we're only going to work with agencies that sign this Danaher contract, right? So the operating companies cannot bring their own agency to the table anymore. Um, but that wasn't an approach, and certainly also adjusting to the different cultures I dealt with in the EMEA region and the APAC region. Um, that would not have come along well, right? And also, if I didn't kind of learn the ropes a little bit ahead of time, I would have walked in and tried to bully agencies in Japan, and they would have bullied me right back because there's no option but to work with them. Um, so I think the network I built throughout my career as well came in very helpful there. Um, because I was able to reach out to some other people and say, hey, what can you tell me about working globally? Um, I had met people over the years, that had just reached out to me on LinkedIn, but they were RPO professionals globally. Some of them with my current RPO, some of them not. I was able to reach out to them and say, hey, tell me what it's like working in APAC. What are the things I have to watch out for? So that became an incredible asset, right? And being able to learn about the cultures and business practices from people who I had opened up to and networked in the past, right? And maybe it was as simple as accepting a LinkedIn invite. Maybe it was meeting them at a conference. Um, so that network I had built paid its dividends. And I think the other thing when you're looking to work globally is being humble and maybe also a bit vulnerable, right? And when I say vulnerable, it's being honest, with someone in another country by acknowledging you don't know a lot about their local business practices, but showing the willingness to learn, and find a mutually beneficial path forward. And like I mentioned, the Japanese region, right, was certainly a difficult one for working with agencies, but what I found when I started reaching out to the agencies we'd worked with is that, for one, there were a good number of people that they were expats in Japan, they were Brits, they were Australians, a couple of Americans, um, and they engaged and took the time, probably because I took the right approach instead of the bully approach, right? And I didn't just send them an MSA and say, you have to sign this to keep working with us, but I said, hey, let's get on a call. I'd like to take you through, explain our TA transformation, explain my role, explain why we're looking to move to this Danaher level MSA and kind of the what's in it for them, right? That good old with them. Um, the what's in it for me, right? If you use the M instead of the them, right? When I'm talking to them, but explaining to them that, hey, you've had a relationship which is one of our operating companies and they recommend we continue working with you. But by getting you onto this Danaher level MSA, the door is open for you to possibly support all 10 of our operating companies that are in Japan, right? So now that becomes that business development person, or even if it was just a contracts person, managing director, whoever they may be, they're like, oh, I have a chance to expand my business horizons by doing no extra work, right? I don't have to go sell. I just have to sign this MSA and get to know the TA team, right, at Danaher. Um, so that became, they then saw what was in it for them to come and work with me on this MSA. And a lot of them had to go through a lot of work to get their contracts people to agree to our terms and our commercials. But because they saw that I came offering something, I think it was much better received than if I just pushed it upon them. So that was a long personal example or a couple of examples I shared, but I think for everybody working globally, I mean, I do come back to that vulnerable. If you don't know a lot about the region you're going to be working in, be vulnerable, ask others. You may not want to ask the potential client or the potential vendor, but find other people in your network that have worked in that region. There's also some resources out there. I have to admit, I've not dipped into it yet, but we have access to a tool called Culture Wizard here at Danaher, which can take you through trainings on a bunch of different cultures around the world. So I think there's also that resource out there for those that are expanding into global areas. But I think it's do your homework, right? Do your homework but be willing to be vulnerable and ask for help.
Culture Wizard. I'm going to look that up. I did not know about it,
Yeah.
but vulnerability. I've been reading a lot about it. There is a HR scientist, Brené Brown, who talks a lot about it, where she doesn't talk about vulnerability from the point of view of being weak. But exactly what you said, a vulnerability coming from a point of willing to learn. I don't know this, but I am willing to talk to you about it and also show you what is in it for you in this whole process. You already gave a couple of examples but do you want to share anything where a particular supplier you think about and you're like, they did a great job with this kind of networking, not just in a global context, but someone who comes to mind? Would you like to share an example, especially given that the contingent workforce market is so crowded? For us to um, honestly stand apart is sometimes a little difficult. But yet, some of us manage to do that. And what stuck out for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I gotta say, I mean, I think there's a few people I can think of, and probably a lot of them. The initial meeting was through Club VMSA, right? So a small venue, right? Usually 20 to 40 buyers, 20 to 40 supplier sponsors there. Um, but truly an environment where I feel most people understand they're there to network, build relationships, not to sell. Usually have some of the more seasoned or senior people from a lot of the sponsor firms that wind up going there. Um, but I've met people there that um, once we got to know, and I shared with them what my program was about, and this started when I was at BSF and now has bridged over into here at Danaher. But I share with them openly what my program needs are, where the bulk of our temporary staffing is. And sometimes you realize there's not a match, right? Because they say, hey, I don't really do a lot of light industrial or labs. I do creative, I do finance, I do, tech. Um, but you build a relationship to where like then you see each other at the other conferences. I see them at ProcureCon, I see them at SIA, places where you probably wouldn't bump into people and have that time to talk because it's so crowded. And but yeah, you see them and you want to go talk to them because we've already built that rapport. So there's a number of people that I can think of where that's been that case and we've gotten to know each other. There's probably not a prospect of doing business, but because I get to know them and know about their business, I may tell another buyer, hey, you should go talk to so and so because I had learned what they do and they could help you with your need. So I think you always have to think about that too, is each meeting you have can be a referral generated, not just a sale. Um, but I think it's those people who do take the same thing that have this networking. Quite honestly, and some have been, and I don't view myself as a mentor necessarily, but some have asked me some questions on, hey, how can my firm grow? Some of them have been considering expanding into life sciences and said, hey, can I talk to you about the life sciences industry to figure out if I should make this investment? Um, so sometimes it really is also their curiosity to learn, right, that makes you put your guard down and build a relationship. So those are some of the things I think. I mean, everybody's out there to sell, and I do have to say there are times when I feel a business development person steps over the line, right? And the initial thing is you want to tell them how bad it is, but then you also remind yourself, at least this is how I process it, is, hey, they're doing their job, right? Their boss has sent them out, go find some new business. They're trying to do it either the way they've been trained or the best way they can find. But hopefully some of what we've been discussing helps some of those on the call. And I know a few of the people that have said hi. Already have these skills as well, right? So there are people I've met probably in those same venues at VMSA. So you know, there are plenty of people out there who get it, but I think it's finding those people to learn from. And you may not ask, you may not ask a buyer. I mean, you could, but you may decide you don't want to ask a buyer to be your mentor or to give you some tips. But take notice of those people that do seem to have the relationships with buyers that maybe you'd love to meet and ask them how they've built their rapport with people, right? Because there are some really good people out there that really get it. And based on what I've learned from talking to them, they'll also be willing to be a bit of a mentor and share a bit, right? So I think it comes back to vulnerable, like we talked about previously. But identify some people that you can learn from and ask them. The worst thing they can do is say no, get away from me. But that's not usually human nature if you ask the right way.
I somehow, although I have unknowingly done it, but it never struck me consciously that I could ask another supplier who I see doing awesome on the field that, how do you do it? Because you are right. There are so many, some of them, they are so good at what they do. They have such a good relationship. And that in itself, we naturally got into the next aspect of our topic, and that was mentorship. And my question around that is what would you say are the strategies for senior procurement professionals like yourself to mentor junior colleagues and supplier partners? I know you answered a little bit about that, the supplier partner part, but would love to hear both of them in a more formal way.
Yeah. So I mean, I think, finding one for one, I think mentors come in all shapes and sizes, right? So so it can mean different things to different people as well, right? So I think some people need leadership mentors when they want to work, with throughout their career, right? So some people have leadership coaches, and that happens certainly frequently when people get into usually senior level people manager roles at a company, right? So there are some people who kind of get assigned and their company pays for a leadership
Hmm.
coach who may be a mentor. Um, but I think the rest of us, you may just need it for a fixed duration, right? It's during your job search. It's for kids making college decisions. It might be for somebody buying a house for the first time or deciding to jump into buying an investment property. Like you need a fixed term mentor, right? But in my opinion, I mean, a mentor is really just someone who's very knowledgeable on a topic, um, or maybe has already achieved in that area, who's willing to invest the time to get to know your goals and help guide you towards success, right? And it could be a quick one-time conversation, or it could be hey, we're going to connect on a monthly basis for a period of time. Um, but I think sometimes that mentor can even be the person who holds you accountable, right, to put in the work to achieve your goals, right? So I think there's a number of ways somebody can be a mentor. And I think as far as finding one, right, I think for one, I think you need to build an action plan for what you're looking to achieve so that you can show your potential mentor just how serious you are about achieving this goal and clearly show him or her the gap you're looking to address through a mentor, right? And when I think of my official mentors I've had over time, those I've asked to be a mentor, um, they've been usually the past bosses or past colleagues. Um, but they may have been helpful because they knew a good amount about me already, but also had context of the goals I was trying to achieve. Um, and I can also say I've had unofficial mentors that have helped me achieve goals in both professional and community settings, right? So, but I think, so finding one, I think you have to have your business plan or your action plan, and you have to be able to share what you're looking to address. I think becoming a mentor, like if you'd like to be one, right? There's official channels to becoming a mentor. So here at Danaher, we have mentorship programs through some of our associate resource groups, or they're called employee resource groups, or other things at different companies. Um, and there's certainly numerous community organizations that have mentorship programs. And whether that's going to be that you're mentoring, a young student, somebody who's, trying to figure out, how to get through life. But I think there's less formal ways to be a mentor for someone who's seeking your help. Being willing to listen to them, hear out their action plan if they've actually crafted one, or ask them the questions that help them build an action plan. Um, and then provide them guidance or advice on how to achieve it. So I don't think you have to officially be a mentor to wind up being a mentor. And I've personally had people thank me for being a mentor when we didn't have an official mentor-mentee relationship. Um, but then when I reflected on our conversations and relationship, I was able to see how they consider me a mentor, right? So I think if you're open to being a giver in a relationship, um, it's quite possible those who need a mentor will come find you when they need you. But you can also open yourself up to being a mentor through some of those official workplace or community channels.
Um, that brings me to, of course, I love the part that you touched on being intentional about mentorship, especially if you are looking for a mentor. The other, in your experience, have you had any companies, either done here or in the past, where they have had mentorship programs for suppliers?
Hmm. Um, so I would say I feel when I was at BASF, and I sat in talent acquisition, but the procurement team, they did have a supplier diversity team, right? So a couple of people in procurement that looked to foster relationships with diverse suppliers, right? Not necessarily in the staffing space, but across everything procurement was buying. Um, And I think probably the one place I'd see that where I feel it's most common is probably working through like the organizations when you think of NMSDC or WeBank. The other thing I've seen is, so Kelly OCG is my MSP here at Danaher, worked with them at BSF. I didn't manage the program, but they were also the MSP at AstraZeneca. But having gotten to see what they do in their supplier management team too, I know they have a team that manages both relationships with their top suppliers, but they also look to bring along and mentor some other smaller startup suppliers, right? So I think it really depends, but a lot of companies probably struggle for the headcount to dedicate somebody to that exclusively. So it's always going to be part of somebody's job, or they're going to be somebody like me that has enough of a passion for DE&I and also knows the company's goals that like I've challenged Kelly is, hey, how can you find me more suppliers that can really help help us deliver diversity, right? And then they will go look for those suppliers they've mentored. So like I've spoken to, a shout out to Pam Sand. She's not here on the call, but when I was looking to get a couple of diverse suppliers into our program, I asked Pam, I'm like, hey, who has your team worked with? Right? Who can I talk to see if they might be able to fit? So I do know there's people out there that are mentoring some of those smaller up and coming suppliers. And then I've seen it, at BSF where there is that supplier diversity team. So those are probably the kind of people I'd say if there's a supplier out there looking for that mentor, look in procurement teams for somebody who's got a official title of supplier diversity, or look within the MSPs for some of their supplier relationship teams, because they may be able to give you some pointers, right? And on how to build your business, build relationships.
Thank you, Alan. And I do want to, at this point, just mention some of the comments that came through, which kind of add to what you said. Joy says, I've managed MSP and CW programs and believe it's imperative to engage with suppliers slash partners to be successful in their program. Partnerships are important. Then Rachel says peer-to-peer networking, which you talked about earlier, is extremely important, especially when working alongside the MSP as a common goal is shared to help make our clients may have the best program possible. Uh, it's almost like, patient care is the ultimate thing for life sciences, for contingent workforce programs. Our common goal should be making it the best program possible. All right.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you one of the things I've always challenged my MSP is I know they do scorecarding, right? So they look for suppliers that scorecard well. But I'm like, I would love that if you went and asked all the suppliers who is their favorite account to support, that they would say Danaher or before this BASF, right? So I'm like, so I'd love for you to manage a program that everybody wants to work with,
Mm.
right? I mean, everybody asks to get into your program, but once they're in it, would they rank it as one of the top programs to work with, right? So I think there's definitely that partnership and looking at that both ways. But I think that's really important because we should all be looking to build the best program, the
Yes.
best experience for the workers, the best experience for the hiring managers, the best experience for the suppliers. Everybody should have a good experience working in the program.
Absolutely. Before we run out of time, I do want to talk about the last aspect of our this thing, and that's continuous learning. Now, how can organizations foster a culture of continuous learning to ensure that suppliers remain aligned with procurement expectations and evolving business needs?
Yes, I think part of it is being self-aware, right? And then we don't know everything, and I don't know that any of us ever will. Um, so we should always be open to learning. We should have plans in place for how we continue to learn throughout our career. Um, I think part of the human condition, whether you see it as good or bad, is that we are never a finished product until our life ends, right? So we're always evolving. Um, and I think some thoughts on continuous learning and kind of questions you can ask yourself, right? Is what more can I learn about my company or maybe our competitors? What more can I learn about the vendor options available to me? And this I'm thinking from my perspective in a buyer's role. What more can I learn about MSP, RPO, search firms, right? There's so many vendors to choose from. I'm not looking to change any of those right now, but how do I make sure I keep learning to know who's doing something exciting on the market? Um, I think you start looking for skills you can learn that enhance your job performance or your satisfaction with your job or your satisfaction with your personal life. And I think when you start thinking about other skills you can learn, we can always probably all be better at Excel and analytic skills. The use of AI, right, is obviously a hot topic. Learning internal tools and systems, right? There's so many things that I think are around us that we probably don't have mastered that we could. And then what I always look to do is, who else can I meet in the industry who's doing innovation, innovative things, or doing something differently. And then I think for everybody out there who hasn't done this already, right, is looking at industry certification. So whether you look at a CCWP certification, right, certified contingent workforce professional, or if you work in the HR space, a PHR or SPHR certification, just those things that challenge you to kind of know a full body of knowledge, right, across either contingent workforce program with CCWP or the HR body of knowledge with a PHR. But I think there's a lot, and I think it's continuous learning comes with I think the other thing is developing a growth mindset in yourself, right? So that you do realize that there's always things you could do better, right? But that also when you miss something, it's not a failure, right? It's a learning experience. But it's then taking those notes and going and doing the learning, I think is the critical part.
So, through the discussion, you did mention a bunch of ways where continuous learning is possible. One is, of course, you mentioned SIA certifications, CCWP.
Mhm.
Then you also mentioned the, is it SHRM, SHRM?
Yes. Yeah.
So that's another one. Another one I'd love to add to, you and I talk about it often, is the Institute of Supply Management. I've learned a lot about procurement and supply management through that. You also mentioned one more organization. It's slipping my mind. Club VMSA. Club
Oh, Club VMSA.
VMSA,
Yeah.
right? So all those places are formal ways of learning. Plus, when you're networking, you informally, continually learn to grow. Anything else that you want to add to the list that suppliers and procurement leaders can go to for continuous learning?
No, I think we touched on a lot of them. I mean, I think the conferences are there, but it's going to the conference not as a worker, right? And going
Mhm.
to do business development, but if you can actually go attend the sessions, right? It's a great opportunity to learn. Um, so I think there's that piece too, but I know normally, people have to work their firm's booth. But I think everybody could take a turn being away from the booth for a 45-minute session and go sit in sessions to learn. And I've seen people do that at the conferences, right? So it's not just a business development exercise, but it's a learning exercise. So I think that's the other piece I would think about. Um, yeah, so I think that's probably the piece. But I think it's keeping that continuous learning, and it kind of goes along with, I mean, Danaher as a company really built upon Kaizen principles, and therefore you're always looking for continuous improvement, and to take waste out of processes, right? So I think it's the same thing as how can you continuously improve yourself through that continuous learning, um, and become more efficient, right, at what you do, right, and or effective, and it's really whatever your goals are.
Thank you so much. Okay. No, for a second I thought that you froze again.
Nope, nope.
Uh,
Hopefully, no. The cell phone is keeping me on the internet.
uh,
So in Anu, the only thing we didn't talk about was the quote that you put out there, the Muhammad Ali
yes.
quote, and I put the teaser out there that everybody would have to dial in to learn
Uh-huh.
more about it, right? So I'll quickly just kind of talk to that, right? The service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth. Um, and if people are my age, they certainly would remember seeing Muhammad Ali as a boxer, right? And if you're a sports fan and you're younger than me, you may have saw his boxing as well, right? So he was a heavyweight champion multiple times. Was really well known in the ring, right, as an entertainer and a promoter, right, of the sport of boxing, and said things in the ring like "float like a butterfly, sting like a bee," and he would use rhymes when he was promoting his fight and give his opponents nicknames and really kind of taunt them, right? And he even had a comment at some point that he learned that people who are humble didn't really go far in life, right? At least that was one of the ways he justified the way he behaved in the ring. Um, but what not everybody may know is what he went on to do with the fame he developed during that boxing career. And he used that fame for a variety of humanitarian efforts and as a peace advocate, both here in the U.S. and abroad. Um, he addressed the United Nations Special Committee against apartheid. So he didn't end it, but he was one of those people who stood out and spoke about it, made it more visible to the world. And he was known as someone who stood up for the oppressed and the underprivileged. So I can't say I'll ever have the opportunity to have the kind of impact he had, right, with his view on service to others. But the quote has really resonated with me. And I think everybody should kind of think this way, right, about what they do in both their professional and personal life, right? So every interaction should be entered with the question about how can you serve, or what are you giving to that interaction, right? So I think it's just a really important way to live through life, right? And some people may mention this in other ways that, you want to put more coins into the jar than you're ever taking out of the jar. So that way the coin jar grows for the community around you. But I think, a lot of us have, and it could be people do these activities through their churches, through community organizations, but I think everybody just has to have that way that they think about service to others, right? And the fact that we are lucky to be here on this earth, we're lucky to have everything we have. How do we make sure we do some things for the others around us? And for the suppliers on the call, I think that comes into play, and there's a lot of them that do some great things for the communities around them. Um, whether it's upskilling programs, boot camps that teach people to code. Some support their people doing Habitats for Humanity activities or other things. I think it's how do we all use our superpowers for good, right, to serve the others that are around us. So that's really why that quote resonates for me. It's been there on my LinkedIn profile for a few years, and I don't know that I'll ever change it because it does really, have a feeling for me in my heart.
That is such a beautiful way to start the year and kind of bring the conversation to an end. There's so many people who have come in with comments. Don says Alan Ali was a showman, however, was a civil rights leader, no doubt. I personally did not know that about him, either that he was such an abrasive showman and also that. So it's interesting that we cannot just judge someone by how they are when they are in the ring. There is
Mhm.
another side to them. Give them that opportunity. Maddie talks about network. Priya says, networking is my net worth, though cliche, but so true. Thank you, Alan. Just uh, so many messages. Namika says, well, wonderful, Alan, superpowers.
Yep.
Uh,
And 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 Anu, and for anyone else out there, if you're ever in Louisville, there's a Muhammad Ali museum there. And so you can learn about both sides of both him as that boxer, right? And they have places where you can sit and watch his old fights, but also learn all about his, every bit of impact he had on society around him. So it was touching for me, and so I didn't talk about this, but when I remember when I was growing up, probably in middle school, writing at least one book report about Muhammad Ali. So did a lot of research about him then as a kid. Can't remember everything that was there. But then even as an adult, I mean, a few years ago, I read a book about him, right, and kind of learned a little more, even more reinforcing this service to others. So there's a lot of things out there. But he was originally from Louisville, which is why that museum is there. So Louisville's great if you can get to the Kentucky Derby ever, but if you're there when it's not the Kentucky Derby, there's some nice museums there along the river.
I was there the week before the Derby and I saw all the whiskey museums.
There's
I
that
did
too,
not know.
yes.
I did not know about Ali.
There's
But
also
thank
the Louisville Slugger factory is there, and you can go on a tour of the Louisville Slugger. So they make the baseball bats that pretty much every kid is growing up swinging, playing
uh,
baseball here in the U.S.
I did not know that. So now I know I need to go back there again.
You do, and
But
and if you love bourbon, I've not been on the full bourbon trail, but they will take you on a bus to multiple distilleries, and you can go see
uh,
how the bourbon's made and drink it, and so there's a lot of things you can do in Louisville. But I've also been to the Derby twice, and that's a great experience.
Thank you so much, Alan. This was such a wonderful way to start off the year. A lot of good points, just as we start the year with ProcureCon and CWS Europe and all the other events that come through the year. Hopefully, all of us take some of the advice that you've given us and, you know, implement it the right way. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of the conversation today, being so interactive. That says a lot about our speaker. Obviously, he's built relationships across the board. You can definitely see this conversation on our YouTube channel. We are there across social media platforms. Just do a search for Endotronics Vani Group. If you have any lingering questions that you want to ask, just drop a line to webinars@iic.com. We'd love to hear from you and we'll respond if you have any specific questions. Thank you so much. Thank you, Alan.
All right. Thank you, Anu. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.